Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Manager to Manager. So, if you are just tuning in or you've missed the past couple of weeks, we are in week 3 of a special series that we are doing featuring people leaders from Acklen Avenue. We're thinking about how are we really cultivating a culture of collective leadership where leaders might lead differently, but they're all striving toward the same outcome. So this week, I am so excited to bring you Jennifer Fields. She is the Chief Delivery Officer and reports to Stephanie, who you may have heard earlier in a previous episode. And today we're going to get to know her a little bit better, talk about her leadership style, and learn a little bit more about the leaders who report to her. So, Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you. So I know I just gave like a tiny brief introduction, but please do tell the listeners a little bit more about yourself, your experience leading teams, and what you do now.
Absolutely. So, like so many in this field, I started as a software developer many years ago and quickly found myself cooped up with 11 other people in a room experimenting with a new thing called XP, which was one of the first frameworks with Agile. And I hated it. I hated it. After a couple months, however, I knew that I never wanted to work in any other way. And so that was my introduction to Agile. And unfortunately, like so many other places, the teams worked in an agile way, but the leadership was still trying to find their way and leading in an agile way.
Mm,
And so the next few years were spent learning and failing and really trying to figure out what kind of leader I wanted to be and then moving in that direction. Finally, being brave enough to take on a real leadership role and really trying to execute on the things that I had learned that I wanted to copy or try to emulate. And then those things that taught me I never want to be that type of person.
yes.
And I never looked back. And now it just seems like a blink and I'm where I'm at now. My title is Chief Delivery Officer of Acklen Avenue. And I've considered a real privilege to get to lead the great folks that work in my organization. I am truly blessed to be in this role.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing
Mhm.
that. So, one of the things that has stood out to me as I've recorded this series is that each one of you, one of the first things you say is, we're all different. We all lead differently. And so, I want to start this conversation by diving into your leadership style. So, if you could characterize it or describe it in a nutshell, who is Jennifer as a leader?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't think we do enough reflection on that. I would say in a nutshell, and I'm thinking because this is the way my mind works. So I'm going to form this kind of in the same way that like the Agile Manifesto is formed,
Okay.
right? What
I
do I
love it.
value? So I would say I value autonomy over taking control or having control.
Mm-hmm.
I value individual over a defined process. I value supporting others to solve problems rather than being the hero
Yes.
and solving it myself. My job satisfaction or success, I believe, is really based on the growth or forward momentum that I feel I am supporting and helping or fostering for both the team members that I'm entrusted to lead and the company that I serve.
I love how you were like, let me think about it, but then you were super, super clear about it.
Yeah,
So
it's
that tells me that you really have given it some thought and there's some deliberateness
mhm.
in who you are and how you show up as a leader. And I do love that because as I start to listen to each one of you, I do hear themes. And that theme of really being intentional and deliberate in who you are as a leader is something that I continue to hear from all of you, which is something as an L&D person, we hope we can teach. But I think it does come from that I experienced something, I either really liked it or didn't like it, and now I'm using that as the foundation of how I'll teach others.
Yeah, I think it's important. I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about my why and being very intentional to dive into what parts of what I do day to day brings me great joy and injects energy, inspires, all of those things as compared to the things that do just the opposite. And then as I've made choices in my career or where I want to grow or take training, I always try to really accentuate those areas that I feel naturally bring me joy because I know the things that I feel that way about, I'm better at.
Hmm.
I'm more authentic and I'm much more productive. It also helps me. I'm a reward, goal driven person. And
Yes.
so there are things I am never going to enjoy a spreadsheet. I'm never going to enjoy a
Oh,
spreadsheet. It just
same.
is soul sucking,
Same.
but I have it's part of my job. And so I have to be proficient at it. I have to be able to do it. And so by being able to focus and plan my day, I can incorporate the things that don't really bring a lot of joy and make me very
Hmm.
happy, that are they drain my energy. I can stick those in the middle of some real different types of work that really do inspire creativity, so that when I
Hmm.
do those, I'm much more productive and it's like a rewarding myself.
I want to talk about what you just said because you did start with values, and that is one of the places I think all people leaders should start. What is it that you value? Because to the extent that you know yourself, what you value, and quite often we probably do value it for ourselves, we value it for others, then how does that come to life in real life? So I want to jump into, you said you value autonomy over process. I think I got that
Autonomy
right.
over having control.
Autonomy over having control. So what does that look like in real life? So tell me an example of I am on your team. Where do you see autonomy over control coming to life in the everyday leadership of what you do?
I mean, today's a perfect example. We've got clients and we've got to figure out start dates. When can they start? Well, there's a lot of moving parts in determining a start date. There's what team members do we have available? What teams do we have available? Are there any skill level gaps? All these things. I could very quickly get all that information together and make a decision about start date, staffing, all of that. But I am almost certain that would not be the best decision because I'm not as close to these people. I don't work with them day to day. I don't know everything. And so instead, I spin up a thing and say, here's what needs to happen. We need to come up with these dates. What have you guys got for me? And so instead of doing that myself, which to be honest, it is something that I have to really push against regularly because sure I can do that. I'm a problem solver. I love problem solving. That's why I got into IT. But if I continue to do that, how are the folks who I lead ever supposed to get exposure to that? Not only that, how disrespectful is that? These
Mm,
guys, it's them starting that engagement, not me.
yes,
So why would I not let them make that determination and support them? I push all the information I have down to them and let them make the decision. And that works for me. It works for me. It's kind of like the five love languages, right? The
yes.
theory behind that is the way that you feel loved, what makes you feel loved is how you show love. For my leadership style, everything I do, if you really looked at the root cause or why is she doing this, I am continually trying to be the leader that I would want to work for.
I love that.
And there is challenges that because not everybody's like me. And so sometimes I have to pivot because I may be doing something, communicating in a way that I would love and admire
Hmm.
and enjoy, but someone else may need a different style in order for them to feel appreciated. So I do have to pivot and be aware of that. But for the most part, my leadership go tos, my style, how you will see me naturally move, all comes back to wanting to be the leader that I would follow.
That takes an incredible amount of self-awareness. I think to one, recognize what kind of leader you are, where that came from, but even acknowledging that the leader that I want may not be the leader that somebody else's want.
Mhm.
So where I'm trying to be the leader that I would like, that actually may not be the best fit for somebody else. And so where do I pivot? Where do I adapt to
Yeah.
make sure that I'm giving them what they need? So I
Yeah, how
thank
do
you for
you
saying that.
flex in order to meet their needs and be the best you can be for them?
Hmm. Yeah. Let's go to the next one that I actually really like, which is, and correct me if I got this right, you said you describe leadership as it's a mindset more than a process. I want to hear more about that because I think sometimes we tend to maybe overcorrect and being like, to be a good leader, you must do this, this, and this. And we try to create processes around it. Share your philosophy on why you think it's a mindset or you choose mindset over process.
Because we're dealing with human beings and there are no two human beings exactly the same.
Hmm.
And processes are meant to be effective when you have defined steps. Human beings are way too complex for that to be effective all the time. That's just the fact of it. And I think that in the days of when my dad was working at Chrysler on the line, the folks that managed him were able to manage in a way different way using way different methods than I do because they were not managing the human beings, they were managing the work. The human beings were showing up and they were just doing these very repeatable tasks that in
right.
most cases took no creativity. And they were basically hiring hands and feet, right,
Mhm. Yep.
to keep things moving. And so it was a different type of leadership. When we moved into the realm of creative work, where people are most days doing very little that's repeatable or that's done to in the same way, if you want to be effective, you have to look at, all right, now I'm leading unique individuals. And how do I do that that supports the very thing I need, which is them being most creative and productive? And so there is no process for that. And so all you can do is have the bones of what we have learned through failure, studies, like Daniel Pink's study on motivation is a great one. Those kinds of learnings to craft, okay, here are the things that we have seen routinely work, like
Yes.
autonomy and purpose. Nobody will
Mhm.
argue with that. So no one's arguing with it, but yet, because it is so hard and difficult and challenging to lead putting those things first,
Mm.
when the going gets tough, people will often revert back to, okay, we're just going to create a document and we're going to manage to that document. So what they're doing is they're shrinking away from the real work of managing unique people and trying to replace that and become like the people that managed my father back in the
Oh my
day, right?
goodness. Yes.
And it's hard. And I even there, I mean, anybody who tells you that this doesn't happen is lying to you because it happens. It is natural. You get tired, you get frustrated, and you're like, let's just create a document. Like, I can't do this anymore. That's where you will go because it's work. It is work. Leading the way I lead, you are providing an opportunity for people to show up like they are, exactly who they are, but you're insistent on not leaving them there. But then
Mm.
you've got to match their pace and you got to know when to push and when to sit back and let them take a rest. You got to let them choose sometimes where they grow. And then sometimes you don't have the luxury of that. You have to nudge and push. And it is so much harder than the let's create a document and manage to the document. Let's send out all the blanket memos we can, right?
Yep.
But
Yep.
it's so much more effective and worth it.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I get it from thinking about leading my own teams, but also recently began working with a client and helping them start to optimize their processes. But what I've come to realize as I'm getting to step back and be an observer is that every person comes to the process with all of their own stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even though we're like, this is the process, you're supposed to do this and this, I now realize I'm also coaching them to be like, but what do you know about this person that's going to filter how they come to this process and what they're
Right.
going to do with it? And getting them to think a little bit more about there is an integration of those items and we all won't see it the same way. We all won't adjust to it. Some of us really do like a ton of structure. So if you write the process, we're actually quite thrilled with that. And
Hmm.
some of us, myself included, are butterflies, and too much structure actually makes us feel stifled and
Hmm.
demotivated. And so, to your point, a good people leader has to be able to see all of that all at once and know how to almost orchestrate all of the different pieces and parts of people who are working for them toward that common goal in a way that still makes people feel good about it as well.
Yeah, I really believe in leading to outcomes. An example of this is our lead devs. We brought them together and said, let's define your role. And I said, here are the outcomes that we're looking for. This is the problem we're trying to solve. Knowing that, what parts of this gap do you think you guys can pick up and fill? What would you define this role? How would you want this role to look? And what are you willing to experiment with and then provide us feedback on? My job was done at that point.
Yes.
They took it. And I can tell you, I have never been one that likes to be dictated to.
Mm-hmm. Same.
And so if you give me a process, my first reaction is always going to be resistance, just because no one asked me.
Yes.
I wasn't invited in to help solve the problem. I haven't even been invited to acknowledge if I thought there was a problem,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I just don't feel like, I, why waste the time, right? As long as I get the outcomes I need, how they get them, I don't care, right?
Yes.
And it's what I found is I have people, I coach some folks and they will say, well, I don't have time to spend 3 or 4 meetings letting them define their role. I'm like, really, you don't? Do you not have the time, or do you not know how to do that? Or are you afraid of giving up some of your power?
So that's an interesting set of questions because I often find it's a combination of those things, right?
Mm,
Is one, I don't know how. And I will say I attribute that to people leaders never being fully prepared for the role. I think about even my own ascent into people leadership. And again, it was like one day I wasn't, one day I was.
mhm.
Congratulations. And the complexity of what people leadership really is. So I think it's the how to do that. And hearing that you coach, hearing that you've had your own experience, I would imagine that you've arrived at this place where you are as a people leader. You probably didn't start off where you are today. Many of the people I talk to don't start off right.
No. Well, and if they tell you they did, again, they're lying. I did not. I learned there are some things about my leadership that I was born with. It's just
Sure.
my personality. I've always been very inclusive
Mm-hmm.
because, again, I lead like I want to be led. So the struggles that I have are almost all related to the gaps. And so my blind spots. So
Hmm.
I have to adjust and work on those areas. We're
Sorry.
also not rewarded. We are taught fake it till you make it. So when I ask people, when I ask a leader, did you think about this? Why did you not choose to do this? And they said, didn't have time. Almost always, it has nothing to do with them having time. They are afraid, concerned. There is a lack of support, safety, something that's preventing them from trying that because it feels so unsafe to try
Hmm.
because you are giving up your power. What if those people don't get the outcomes you want?
That's
What if
right.
they do something that is terrible and now you look like you didn't know what you were doing? What if somebody says, "Why are you letting them make that decision? It's your job."
Yes.
And when they don't have this support to feel like they can say, "You know what? I hire very smart people and I don't know. I don't have all the answers." How many leaders have been rewarded for saying they don't know,
None that I know personally,
right?
to be honest. And I think there's a couple things to that. One is for some reason, there's this assumption that when you become a people leader or a senior executive, that you're supposed to be all knowing, that somehow you become this infallible being and you don't have the same questions, doubts, concerns as other people. But to your point, we're taught to fake it till we make it. And that then becomes the struggle. But you actually have a different saying instead of fake it till you make it. You have something else that you
Yeah,
say.
I say hone it till you own it. Right?
Yes.
You own it till you hone it, right? You own what you don't know as you're making progress in figuring it out,
Hmm. I love
right?
that.
I don't fake it till I make it. I mean, think about what you're saying. You're telling people to lie and to cover up,
Right.
right? How is that? Talk about disrespectful. And so words matter. I really try very hard never to use the term resource when I'm talking about a human being. And I hadn't thought about it until you said it, but I do spend a great deal of time making sure that I understand my values, what I align with. And when I'm hiring people, when I'm interviewing people, one of the quickest ways to get a yes from me is to tell me you don't know something and then speak to the fact that you'd like to find out or come at me with curiosity.
And I think to me that speaks to feeding and acknowledging vulnerability versus feeding and acknowledging our ego. And during our prep call, one of the things that you said that really stood out to me was being willing to give up the cape. Because I think when we jump into problems, when we pretend that we always know the answer, we're putting on our super person cape and
Yes.
that's what we're presenting to our teams and to other people. But really, what I think I hear you saying is that even as a people leader, we have to be very deliberate to take that cape off, to give up that power. Yes, it might make us feel vulnerable to give power back to our teams because we can't control what's happening, but that's a deliberate choice. So I'm wondering if you could share a little bit more about just giving up the cape, your philosophy on how do we work against that ego that we protect as people leaders?
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's not like you just take your cape off, you're giving it to someone else and then supporting them in being successful. That can feel very threatening. And I think as a country, we've fostered this competitiveness, and
Mm.
that the only way you can get ahead is if you keep the people you lead down. I fully believe that leading the way I do takes way more talent, way more skill, is way more difficult. And so there are days where your job is just not as satisfying. There's a lot of what we do that's tough. We have to make tough decisions,
We do.
and it doesn't feel good all the time. And I remember when I was a developer, it was finisher and completer, so you could work on something. It's like, poof, it's done. You pour into people and they disappoint you.
Yeah.
So there are days that it is so tempting for me to go and put that cape back on and go mess around in my team's business and be the hero. That's something you just have to keep in check. And you have to remind yourself that the greatest example of how good you are as a leader is how much power you have been
Oh.
able to give away.
And now I love that. I have never heard anybody say that, but I love it. I
Because
do.
it's when you think about that when so I in my head, and everybody has their little mind games they play with themselves. I coach a few very young managers at other companies, and I tell them, this is going to happen. You're going to be tempted to get the cape back out of the drawer. You're going to have a bad management day where you get told no about budget, where you can't get people the training you think they need. It's just going to happen. You're going to feel like I am a failure as a manager. I'm a failure as a leader. And you're going to be tempted to start dabbling back in what you know you were
Mm,
successful at. So when that happens, I want you to think about instead, how can I spend a moment and give up some power and support some of the folks that with me? How can I do that as an ego boost, as making myself feel successful instead of going back? So don't go backwards,
don't go
do
back.
more of what you. And so that's how when I start feeling like I'm having those days, I will think about, and I sometimes I will even reach out to people. I'll spend 10 minutes sending notes to people, catching them doing things right,
Hmm.
telling them how much I appreciate, right? Now I am actually feeding my ego and making myself feel successful again, leveling myself out by doing the right thing instead of going in and interfering. And even if I
Yes.
have the right answers, I'm brilliant. I am a smart cookie. But I've got a sign on my desk that says, uh, "Why are you talking?"
Oh, I
And
love that.
what that's a message is, are you saying this? Are you offering this up out of service to your team or out of service to your ego?
Hmm.
Because sometimes we just want to feel smart,
We do.
right? And when
Yeah.
you've had your butt handed to you, when you're on senior leadership, you're going to lose some battles, right? You're
Yes.
going to win some, you're going to lose some. Sometimes it's a draw. Either way, having something make you feel smart and feel like, that's right, I still got it."
But you know what this reminds me of a little bit, what you said about giving up your power. But I can tell you, one of my proudest moments as a people leader is we were in a function meeting. And my senior leader was just discussing what was going on. And there was various of us, my peers and our teams. And we were struggling with how do we help the organization figure out how to foster connections now that we were in the midst of COVID and everybody was like, I'm never going back into the office. And someone on my team chimed in and said, well, I think this is what connection means to me. And he laid it out like a little framework. And then somebody else on my team chimed in and was like, yeah, because da 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 da. Da." And then a third person on my, and I had such immense pride because I knew that they were describing what I had given to them, right? They
Mhm.
could articulate what was happening. And so that sort of give was like, I didn't need to come in and be like, let me tell you the answer to all of this. But they could then go ahead and lead the work, they could lead the
Mhm.
experience. And that is the part where it takes a while, I think, as a people leader to step in and say, my job is not to do the work anymore. Or better yet, what you just said earlier, the people are the work. And it
Yes.
sounds cliche, it sounds like a hug or warm and fuzzy, but really and truly to step back and see my job is to influence their experience and to that experience to give them what they need to now go forth and they are going to do the work. And that's the part where sometimes it's hard to articulate that, but the moment of
Mhm.
pride of just watching them take what they had experienced in their own lives, their own work, and be able to then share that forward and articulate what this thing meant. For me, that was pride. And it was more than
Oh,
me jumping
yeah.
in being like, let me tell you how to build connection. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and making space. That's the other thing. Being an extrovert, I've had to really work intentionally, and I still don't think I'm great at it, at giving people space to fill, because if you're filling all of it, there's no room for them.
Yes.
And so intentionally, and it doesn't mean being manipulative. Like you will never see me ask a question. If I already have the answer and I've already made up my mind, I'm not going to pretend otherwise.
Mm,
I'm not going to come in and ask a question. I people feel that. I know when someone's doing that to me, and it just annoys me. So I try to always really either truly authentically be curious, or I just tell them, "Hey, I have got a thought, I have an idea, I have an opinion, but I really want to hear yours." So I'm just
yes.
upfront that I've got something. If I've already made up my mind, there are decisions that I have to make that it is not appropriate to invite them into. Those come up, they are very rare. I can count probably in the 3 years I've been doing this job, maybe three at that. I mean, and it should be a rarity,
Yes.
but they happen. And when they happen, I tell them. I'm just upfront. This is not up for discussion. And I'm very transparent about it. I have so hated in the past where managers come in and they're like, "Let's talk about this," and they've already got the decision made. It's and so I've actually said, which probably I should have gotten fired, but I didn't. I've actually said, "You're wasting my time. If you already have a decision and you know what you're going to do, then just tell me so we can move on and I don't have to sit through this."
And I've heard
So,
employees say that. I've heard employees say, like, why did you ask me if you were just going to do
yeah,
what you were
it's
going to do anyway? It's a waste
so
of my time.
disrespectful and
Yes.
demeaning. It's like, good grief.
I want to talk about making space a little bit more because as a part of this series, I have gotten the opportunity to meet your team of leaders. And what struck me is just as you and your leadership team, your peers and your leader are, again, all uniquely different as leaders, they are all uniquely different
Mhm.
as leaders. And I think you have said that you have been deliberate in picking people who are not exactly like you which and we know that as people who hire other people, our biases can creep in to hire people like us. But talk to me about how you go about making space for people, setting the expectation, right, with your own leadership or setting an example with your own leadership, but then making space for people who may lead a little bit differently, who might be different from you naturally. How does that all come together?
I think early on in my career, I realized that I needed to find my complement. And when we hire teams and we build teams, you get better, you get more when you hire folks that complement each other, that aren't duplicates. And individuality is so important to me. So I can't imagine not giving space and allowing people to bring their individual selves. For me, I am concerned about alignment with our values, where our heart's at. All of my leaders, the thing they have in common is they care deeply about their team members.
Mm,
They all have a servant's heart. They are very trusting and trust based in different ways. And so when you have those core things in alignment, how they navigate to get the outcomes that we all agree are what we want, their individuality actually raises our value proposition, not lowers it.
yeah.
It also gives them a space where I am continually learning from them, they continually learning from each other. One of my ADMs sent an email to a client and I read it and I was like, I am totally stealing that. Like there were some phrases that were put in that email that I was like, "Oh my gosh, that was beautiful." Like such a great move, right? And so I let them know that. We share that. I have one ADM who has great intuition around the heartbeat of their teams and their team members.
Hmm.
And they will naturally plan things that myself and one of the other guys, that is not as natural of a strength. And so we learn and get those nudges, those
Yes.
reminders. By the same token, two of my folks love spreadsheets. They love Excel and
Yes.
they know how I feel about it. And so I bring them in, and believe it or not, they've actually got me pretty proficient in Excel. And then I help them. There are gaps that they had that I've been coaching them with. And so when you hire people that have completely different styles, but are in complete alignment with what
Mhm.
really matters, then all this learning can happen. When you hire people that are just like you're all going to step in the same hole and not be able to get out. I remember me and my husband joined a church, and their Sunday school classes were by age. And I remember looking around and saying, well, this is not helpful. Everybody's in the same boat.
Right.
Like, we had a whole group of people who all had young children, and none of us knew what we didn't know. And
Mm.
so I went, of course, me being me, and said, this is not helpful. Like, can we have it would be helpful for me to have people that have kids in high school, or have people that have managed to survive raising kids who actually are out of their house, so
Mhm.
that I have somebody to look at me and go, yes, you are going to get past potty training and survive it. It's the same thing with leadership, right? Having that diversity, you're not all in the same boat. You can draw from one another and complement each other. Then there is no weakness because
Together.
everything's covered. We
Mhm.
fill each other's gaps.
Yeah, and that is the vibe that I get in speaking to not only your team, but speaking to those of you on the SLT as well, that you are all different. I hear I am a people person, but to your point, the spreadsheets and the project plans, those things make my eyes gloss. But I have peers that I would go to and be like, "Can you help me?" And I will
Yes.
coach you through that situation that you're having. And
Yes.
I think that is the important part when organizations are thinking about building a culture of good leaders. Where they go wrong is they feel like they need to create copycats of one another.
Mhm.
All of our leaders need to be like this, and this.
And
But
how
you,
lazy is that? I
right?
mean, I know that sounds harsh, but come on.
Yes.
Again, it's like, I will tell you, it is much more challenging to manage
Uh-huh.
people who A, are very different from you, but B, very different from each other. It's like, no, when I had my children, I thought I had it all figured out. And then I had my second, and I was like, well, crap, I'm starting over again. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
so
they're
it's
different people,
easier.
aren't they?
Yes. And you know what? By the same correlation, I used to look at people who were letting their kids just run wild, and I was so judgmental. And then you have them, and you're like, I just am too tired. And
Mhm.
being a really great parent takes way more work than being a bad one. And it's the same
Yes.
thing with leadership. Being a really great leader takes a lot of work. And it is much easier to just write your process documents,
Yep.
dictate, right? I look at my son's in the military, and he has gone to agile conferences with me. He spoke at agile conferences with me, and he has run into the military leadership, and it's been entertaining to watch that happen. And he is leading in a different way in the military
Mhm.
than is traditional leadership.
I love it.
Uh, it's a choice. It is a choice. And when I coach people, I don't listen to excuses. Okay, that's where you are today. We're not leaving you there.
Yeah.
It is a
Oh,
choice. I will also say, and I talked about me coaching. I always have a coach. I am where I
yes.
am today because I have invested and am constantly opening myself up to be coached. I have a mentor and I have a coach who has helps me tremendously with my growth, with my self-reflection, challenges me when I start trying to make excuses for my behavior. When
I
I've
love it.
blown it, they hold me accountable. They challenge me in that way. And so to me, another good sign of a leader is if you are not being coached, if you are not actively seeking insight and inviting someone in to mentor and coach you, you are really doing yourself and those you're leading a disservice.
I applaud that. You're so spot on with that. I've had a coach for many years as well. They've been so invaluable. So I, I am always enlightened when I talk to you. I am so grateful that you decided to join us for this conversation. You've given us great nuggets. I think the first is for listeners, self-awareness is really important. Think about, are you the leader that you would want to be led by? That could be a good thing or a bad thing, but then also acknowledge that maybe other people need other things. It is absolutely more difficult to manage people than the process. And so just think about whether or not you're putting your efforts into managing the process of work or the people who do it and how you're making space for them to show up, to own their own processes, to use their own insights into thinking about how they're doing. So I'm going to encourage you all to give up the cape, to see how much of the power you have that you can push down to those who report to you, and just challenge yourself to be better people leaders. So, Jennifer, if anybody wants to reach out to you, is LinkedIn the best way to do that?
Yes, you can hit me up on LinkedIn. You also can find me at jennifer.fields@acklenavenue.com. Would love to hear from any of you. And thank you, Kim Maria. I can't express enough how grateful I am that you took the time to spend with the the leadership that I have, that I'm blessed with. I know
Yes.
it meant a lot to them, and giving them that space and that opportunity. I am so grateful for you to do that for them.
Oh.
So thank you so much. That makes
It
me
is
very happy.
it is my
They
pleasure. And
deserve the spotlight. They really do.
and I love that. I love that because good people leaders are not often acknowledged. And so my whole purpose for this podcast has been to seek out and acknowledge good people leaders, share the space and give them spotlight. So it has been my pleasure. And for listeners, that is a good segue that you should make sure you tune into the next episode, because you will get to meet Jennifer's team, all three of them, and we'll be talking about how they all have the same job description, they do the same role, but they are uniquely different leaders. So we'll continue our theme of unity with variety. So until then, until next time, please take care of yourselves and each other. And thank you for listening to Manager to Manager.